pleasure to meet you today. I am
As we see here, maybe AI in an instantiation that's going to evoke new issues compared to other ones. I think one sort of lasting issue that I find intriguing about this case is, firstly, you emerge from the case clearly having learned that even though AI is a tool, when it comes to consumer perception, it's anything but, and you have to be really mindful about that. But one discussion point that students still hang around and ask me about is whether they think all of this is going to go away in a couple of years, okay? Because it's going to become ubiquitous.
Welcome to Cold Call, the podcast where we dive deep into the groundbreaking case studies used in the classroom at Harvard Business School. Museums have spent centuries bringing art to life. But what happens when technology can literally make a painting speak? Today, we're exploring a dilemma at the intersection of art, marketing, and AI. Faced with changing audience expectations and growing pressure to engage younger visitors, a museum considers a bold idea: using generative AI to animate one of its most iconic artworks as part of a public campaign. The proposal promises attention and accessibility, but it also raises deeper questions. Would it help people connect with art or distract from it? Could AI broaden engagement without compromising authenticity? And who gets to decide what an artwork would say? This case is about far more than a marketing experiment. It's about innovation versus stewardship, technology versus interpretation, and how institutions rooted in history navigate a rapidly changing future. Today on Cold Call, I'm joined by Professor Julian Freitas and guest John Connolly to discuss the case Harvard Art Museums, When Art Meets Artificial Intelligence. I'm your host, Brian Kenny, and you're listening to Cold Call on the HBR Podcast Network. Julian Freitas' research addresses questions about how consumers perceive, adopt, and interact with AI systems. You're a repeat guest here, Julian. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the show. John Connolly is the Director of Marketing for the Harvard Art Museums and the protagonist in this case. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you for the
You knew you were the protagonist.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
Your name's all over the case. So
Exactly.
This case hits close to home, right? Here we are. We're across the river from Harvard. But I have to say I have a personal connection to the Harvard Art Museums. I grew up just about 20 minutes away from them, and I used to go visit them all the time with my aunts. My grand-aunts would take me there, and I saw the glass flower collections and all the taxidermy and things like that. And then, fast forward another generation, my children have all gone there for field trips with their schools. So lots of personal connections there. I love the Harvard Art Museums, and I think this is a really fascinating conversation. I was mentioning to both of you before we got started that the Boston Globe recently had an article about the Museum of Fine Arts animating some of their artwork. Very controversial, so we should have some fun with this one. Julian, let me ask you to start, if you can tell us, we know that museums are guardians of history and tradition. Why did you decide that this was an interesting case to write about?
Yeah, so my research program is broadly based on this assumption that artificial intelligence, from a consumer perception standpoint, is a fundamentally different technology from other technologies. And so it raises unique sources of value and risks and also barriers to adoption. So I had a sneaking suspicion that by studying an organization that preserves history and tradition, we might learn something broader about these types of questions. And I was particularly drawn to an art museum because arts are one-of-a-kind original products, if you think of it that way. So I think that raises some unique constraints for marketers. You can't duplicate it or put it online. So what could AI do to maybe help? But also, what are some of the challenges that come from mixing AI with art?
Yeah. What's your cold call? I'm curious when you start the discussion.
So this case deals with a particular instantiation of AI avatars. Yeah. So I asked the class, should the Harvard Art Museums use AI avatars in a marketing campaign? So straight to the action.
Right to the core.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you probably get an interesting mixed response to that. I won't ask you to give away too much about what happens in the classroom, but I'm sure that's a good start. John, let me turn to you. Thank you for being here with us. You had to walk all the way across the bridge.
It was good. It was warm.
To get here. It was a nice day for it, though, yeah. Maybe you could start. Just tell us a little bit about the Harvard Art Museums. How many things do you have in the collection? What's the sort of composition of the museum?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Harvard Art Museums is it's embedded in the university campus, right adjacent to Harvard Yard. There's over 250,000 objects in the collections. One of the largest collections in the country, in the US, which is fantastic. And we have 5 floors, 50 plus galleries, and we have art from ancient works right up to modern and contemporary works. We reopened after a period being closed in 2014. Renzo Piano renovated the museum, and now we have all these collections under one roof, which is fantastic. We were used to have an admission fee to get in, but about 2.5 years ago, we launched a free admission initiative, which was really a game changer.
I thought that was amazing to read about that in the case. I didn't realize that it was free. I don't remember what it cost before necessarily, but to do that seems like a big step, particularly for a nonprofit.
Oh, it was a big step, and price is a barrier for access when we're talking about accessibility. So that was a big move for us. And then obviously we had from a marketing perspective, we had a new challenge of like sometimes free can equate to lesser, and so we were out there trying to beat the drum that we're not lesser. This is we really pushed the size of the museum, and we put our we talked about the size of our collections and really tried to make it seem like a noteworthy experience that even though it's free, you should still make the effort to come.
Right. So. And, and I think you're up against a lot of challenges, right? You're not the only game in town. Boston has a lot of excellent museums, so it's a competitive place to get attention. And I think museums, generally speaking, I'd love to hear your take on this, have a challenge just in terms of getting people to understand, why should they spend time there, given all the other things that they could do.
Yeah, it's we're in a very crowded market in Boston. We have the Museum of Fine Arts, we have the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Institute of Contemporary Art. Down the street, we have the MIT Museum, which opened in a new building itself. And it's an extremely crowded market. And then you talk about you're in a sports town too, on top of everything else. And then it's Netflix, it's Amazon, it's the movie theaters. So there is a massive lot of pressure to try and pull people into an art museum. I will say that more people are coming into art museums. People who are generally Instagram has helped. A lot of people come in, influencers recording themselves walking through museums and things like that. So there is kind of like a nice energy around art museums, but there is such pressure on museums to bring in visitors, to generate revenue, and also to kind of like build a membership base also, which is a challenge now for us because admission price was a membership benefit that went away. So we sort of face that now as a new healthy challenge that we're embracing.
And some of that gets to the heart of the case, right? So you're even considering this, and this, by the way, we should say, is animating some of the artwork, the classic pieces that are in the museum. The only reason you're even thinking about doing that is so that you can appeal to a broader audience and engage a broader audience, maybe in ways that people would find fun and interesting, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of content creators out there, so that even that world is very noisy right now. So you're looking for something that maybe can, you're doing something different. And, art museums still struggle with a perception issue. They have long, dusty corridors. They're very...
and Harvard, by the way, you add on to that, Harvard's 375 years old or whatever it is, right?
So, and they're generally, shush environments. People go in, they're perceived as shush environments, where people go in and, they have to be, there's a lot of rules and stuff like that, So that's the perception of museums out there. And so it's kind of, as a marketing person working in museums, it's always healthy to kind of push and kind of flip those perceptions a little bit. And AI has been, is there, it's right in front of us, and it's like, how do we, how do you engage without that, without tipping over, something else. So that was a big challenge of where we landed with Julian.
So Julian, I'm sure you're seeing this, other kinds of organizations encounter things quite similar to this. It seems to me like it takes on an added level of tension when you talk about something that people revere, like artwork, right? And in this situation, the case really goes deep on the fact that there was a lot of concern from the curators. Curators in an art museum, I think, are kind of like faculty at a university, right? They're the experts, the subject matter experts. They get the final say on things. But, what are some of the tensions that arose in the context of this case around how you get to interpret and who gets to interpret, what the AI could or couldn't do?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the reactions that are described in the case, because you could think of this as just another marketing campaign. But as we were just discussing, this is an embodied persona who's talking to you, who's moving.
Mm-hmm.
And that combination of what AI can do with the fact that this is a one-of-a-kind artwork seemed to raise all sorts of barriers that other marketing campaigns hadn't. So, the curators were, of course, very concerned with representing the artwork accurately as the artist might have wanted it to be perceived. And so they didn't want to layer on interpretations that would seem at odds with that.
Yeah.
The conservators, of course, want to preserve the artwork exactly as it is as well, and they don't want to transform it in any way. And now you're making it move and potentially biasing people toward the character, let's say, rather than other details of the artwork. Then there are art historians who are worried about this idea of losing the skill to be able to analyze art and talk about it, which is also resonating with broader societal concerns around how AI is going to lead to de-skilling.
Yeah.
So all of these different stakeholders are worried about this. And then on top of that, now that it has a voice, now that it has a body, some are concerned that it's going to be perceived as a spokesperson for the museum, as if the museum's saying, hey, this is an artwork that we think really stands for what we're all about.
Yeah.
And so that triggers a whole discussion about, okay, then in that case, which particular artwork should we use,
Yeah.
And then also, by the way, can we keep control over the narrative? Can it speak in our voice? Is it going to misrepresent us? Because we know that AI can hallucinate various facts. So how do we get the best of this technology while also keeping control of the brand?
Yeah. Does that ring true to you, John? I'm wondering. And Harvard also, the Harvard museums are teaching places. Right?
Yes.
So you have to sort of balance this dual identity of you're a public asset, you're open to the public, but you're also accommodating students and faculty. And I'm wondering if what Julian just said sort of rings true to your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a sort of an interesting challenge for us when we have that dual identity. I think it's a good kind of challenge. So we have an academic audience that use the museums as a research hub and kind of a lab for new ideas. And they invite inquiry. I think that's the point where we have a little bit of a connective tissue between the academic university museum and the academic audience related to a university museum and the public-facing institution. I think we're all about inviting people in to look closer and to build a relationship with an art object, feel something. And I think once we do that, we succeed, because I think that means that person feels something, and they come back. And we have this whole family student guide program where we train students to be student guides, and it's really, they do such a remarkable job. And I've gone on their tours with the public, and the first thing they do is ask people, what do you see? They invite all the perspectives in, they invite inquiry, and I think that is a wonderful connective tissue between the academic audience and the general museum public.
But you've had some fun with this in the past, and the case has some exhibits from previous marketing campaigns that you've done. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the Barbie.
Oh my God,
campaign, which just surprised me, and I thought, well, this is kind of fun. Like, I'm enjoying this, and maybe that's
that was we sometimes we move into this irreverent kind of space. And our social media and digital strategist Tara Mettle was the one, and she worked in collaboration with curators, got it all signed off, and
I'm sure
use this object and kind of position it as a in relation to the Barbie movie, and it really kicked off in the comment section in Instagram. Some people were saying this is a travesty, you shouldn't be doing that. and other people are saying, it opened up a healthy debate. There was a few people that kind of like were very absolute in their comments, but you get that. But there was actually some back and forth that happened, which was great, and there was a nice energy off that.
Yeah.
And again, I think in the perception game, it kind of messed with perceptions a little bit, or kind of turned them around a bit, because again, we still have that perception issue with museums, and any time that's kind of poked and prodded a little bit, I find that we're succeeding.
Yeah. And I should just, for our listeners who haven't seen this, I'll describe what the Instagram post was. It was basically an ancient artifact that looked like it was in a Barbie box.
Yeah.
And the teaser copy on the box was describing the artifact. It was very well done, I thought, and really...
It was great.
And really funny. Julian, this reminds me of another case that we had on Cold Call once about the Boston Ballet. That one didn't involve AI, but it involved the challenge that the Boston Ballet, storied institution in the arts, has in attracting a younger audience to start to appreciate ballet and to want to attend. Their audience is aging quickly, so they're trying to find ways to update some of the old, ballets and make them more contemporary. And I'm wondering, as you look broadly across, organizations, is this a challenge that's very common in cultural organizations where your population is aging out and you need to find a way to attract that newer, younger audience and breathe new life maybe into what you're doing?
Yeah, I think when you look across various surveys, the challenge that you see is less so much getting them in the door and more sort of what John was describing around turning them into repeat, invested visitors who also contribute economically to the welfare of the museum. I think another challenge related to this is keeping abreast of how attitudes toward museums and cultural organizations are changing. So the case, for example, features some research done by a consulting company showing that one of the main sort of outcomes that people expect from museums is to be entertained. And that's sort of across the board, which of course raises challenges if now people are spending time at home, on Netflix, for example. But then there are also some generational differences that are interesting. So older generations, for example, think that an important role for museums is to conserve art and preserve it through the years to a greater extent than some of the younger generations. Whereas many of the younger generations think that an important role for museums is also to be a place for self-discovery. So these are just some of the shifting, attitudes that I think someone like John needs to keep abreast of if he wants to continue to evolve and stay relevant.
Yeah. And then managing that brand, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different stakeholders, John, right? So you've got conservators, we mentioned faculty, you've got students, you've got people who belong to the museum. As you started to maybe socialize this idea among those different stakeholder groups, what were some of the things that you were hearing? And were there any pushback that you said, you know what, they might be right, this could be a wrong step?
That's an excellent question. And I would say, as a museum, we're on our own journey. And when we talk about trying to engage audience on, to have more fun, we had this museums at night that we run on the last Thursday of every month, where and we have this wonderful piazza, this indoor courtyard. It's a gathering space. It's for people to socialize. It's modeled after a piazza in Italy, a bustling town square, so that we wanted to kind of bring that to life at nighttime. So the museums at night looks completely different. So we felt like we pushed into new ground there, and we proved that this could be something that could be successful, that people would come in, they would socialize in this space, and then they would visit the galleries and they would actually spend time with art, which is fantastic. And that, warmed the hearts of everybody in the museum, which was very gratifying. But with regard to socializing the AI it comes with so much bristle baggage,
Yeah.
So it's funny, you can never say like, let's talk about AI, period. You kind of have to like come at it with a 45-degree angle so you can kind of state what you're trying to achieve, And the goal here was to use AI to bring people closer to art, basically. And to also maybe do something a little unexpected, because, Julian says, like, there's, museums are evolving, so we should evolve as in how we market the museums.
Yeah.
And, we're also in an ecosystem in Harvard where we, our teaching museum pushes the envelope a little bit more. Experimentation happens within our four walls. So we should do that through marketing too. So when I did socialize it with curators, I was honestly, I was careful not to forward this around as an email, because then honestly things get CC'd,
Right.
and but it was I really wanted to talk to people face to face, and to give context, and to really explain what we were trying to do, and people were good. They understood what we're trying to do, and it was a very good conversation. They brought up their concerns in a very constructive way.
Good.
Definitely. The one, there was AI. Will it overwhelm the art? Will it will we become one of those organizations that oh, there they go with AI, and then institutional trust is somewhat starts to creak a little bit. But I think one thing that it was a spokesperson thing that definitely kind of, I was like, oh yeah, that's an interesting heft that comes with this, that this one activation would be viewed as a spokesperson for the brand.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh yeah, that is, and I'm sensitive to voice. Museums are all about trying to get the authentic voice out there. Now I did make sure to stress that we're not trying to fake anything here.
Yeah.
This AI is transparent. It's obvious that we're using AI out in the open, that we're not using it to write emails to donors. And
Right.
I think that is such dangerous territory to go, because if anyone picks up on the fact that an email or a communication has been written by AI, we push our audience further away. And we're trying to, museums are trying to make up ground. Historically, the big divides between museums and their publics. So we're trying to, get closer, and if we start playing around in the background with AI, then that's dangerous. So I really like the aspect that this is very out in the open.
Right.
And that appealed to the curators. They were like, okay, this is we're out there with this. And, so it was interesting.
We've talked about this before, Julian. We had an episode when you were here previously with a firm that engages with customers on behalf of their clients, and has AI generate responses to customer concerns and things like that. And we talked a lot about authenticity in that episode. I feel like it's even more accentuated when you talk about a storied brand like Harvard, and the museums, and people being able to trust that that's being authentic. What does this tell us a little bit more about the broader issue around AI and authenticity, and what should firms be thinking about as they kind of go down this path?
Yeah, you're right. So I think there's one type of use of AI where it's behind the scenes. It's helping you to operate at scale. And I think I agree with John that you have to be careful about where exactly you're using it in those types of settings. Whereas in this case, just to be concrete about what was done, there were two instantiations. One was the artwork talking in a video form, and then there was another one where it was a chatbot that you could have a two-way interaction with. And, no one, I think, would think that this was being done with anything but AI. I think that a couple of general lessons that I take away from this are, firstly, there are certain domains where these barriers to using AI are particularly salient.
Yeah.
So one is like this one, where you have a one-of-a-kind original artwork where people are really concerned about the authenticity of representing that. But there are also other domains that you see a lot of pushback, like ones that involve a lot of trust. So think about tax preparation, where the expectation is that this product is 100% solid.
Yep.
Also domains where we expect there to be some level of human touch, like healthcare, education, where we think that, it's really critical that a human is there in the loop. So that's the first point. I think there are just certain domains where you have to be more sensitive. You can't just assume that because it worked in that other domain, it's going to work here. I think the other one is what John was alluding to around how you execute it. So especially because people are very skeptical of companies tacking on AI to please investors and that sort of thing, they're very sensitive to what might seem like a superficial use of AI, something that's more performative or that's really cost-cutting, even though you're touting it as something else. What they want to see is that you're doing something that you really couldn't do without AI, and that it's adding some real value, and that can be solving some real customer problem, like how to position my furniture in my living room, or some broader societal value, like making a statement using AI that you couldn't have done otherwise. And it could also be educational value. And then a final one, and I think this goes for any new technology that you're using in a very public-facing campaign, is just this issue of authenticity with respect to the brand and the associations that it brings to mind and what it's been doing historically. I think when people are confronted with one of these campaigns, they're asking themselves, does the brand really have a license to be making these types of claims with this technology? Or can I sniff out that this is really jumping on the bandwagon? Which, of course, is tricky when you're trying to bring it in. So I think, again, the execution is important. If you're wanting to invest in this in the future, how do you ease into it as well?
Yeah. What were some of the considerations that you had as you thought about how this would play out creatively, John?
Yeah, it was great because I saw this as a marketing tool.
Of course.
First of all. And I will say, when we're thinking about audiences in the Harvard Art Museums, we're thinking about them on their level of engagement. So I saw, now that we have free admission, we're in this amazing position where somebody could come to the art museum that's never been to an art museum ever before. Yeah. And that's a massive moment, a massive responsibility and a massive opportunity. And this person could come into the museum and engage with an art object and be into museums for forever, and then go to the other museums in Boston too, and really, grow a general museum audience. So that was a big part of it. Obviously, it was a marketing standpoint. That this might be something that is stands out and brings someone into the museum and gets them to engage with an object and think, okay, that was kind of cool. And then go to visit all the other galleries, and all of a sudden they become a museum person and a return visitor. And then there's also the an extra interpretive layer, which I found very interesting, where this AI activation can give us more than something that we could put out on a static image that we could put out across our channels. That this would actually deepen someone's understanding, that they will want to move to the next level of understanding with that object. And I found that very, very compelling. So we would use the digital platforms like your Meta, your Google platforms, but we would also I would love to have seen this in that courtyard space, that piazza space in the museum, on a screen. I mean, we wouldn't be able to hear the voice maybe because it's so loud there, but we have subtitles, and this artwork is speaking. And I think it just said it conveys a come in. It conveys a welcoming. It conveys a come on, let's take a deeper dive. And art. I mean, I really subscribe to the whole Oscar Wilde thing, that art should be playful. I mean, there's a lot of truth telling in art, but it should be playful too. And these artists, they experimented throughout their careers. They experimented with their artistic techniques and everything like that. So this is, I often wonder what they would think about this kind of a thing, And I'm sure there will be varying degrees of reaction. But I think, from a marketing standpoint, I would see it very, very powerful digitally. I would say if we were to take this on in a broader marketing context, we wouldn't. We would narrow our scope. We wouldn't animate all things in the museum, but we would animate more thoughtfully, if we had gone that route, and really tried to make it an interpretive tool where people could get enough information to say, I want to know more.
Right, and to your point earlier about the church-like atmosphere in museums, I think we all feel that when you walk into it. It's not a place where you want to speak up, where you want to feel, jovial and loud. But something like this could totally break the ice. As you walk in, you could feel much less intimidated, right? It makes me wonder, Julian, how much of this, of what John is describing, is really the push to be innovative, and how much of it is the push to be relevant. And maybe those things are one and the same, or maybe they're related. But I think a lot of marketers generally, and I'm a marketer, so I can say this, we're always feeling like we need to be on to the next thing. We got to be innovative. We've got to show that we are, advancing with the times and the way and where people are going. But also relevance is just the key to the realm. If you're not relevant to your audience, why should they pay attention to you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that this is an innovative use of AI.
Yeah.
At the time of the case, there aren't really examples of people animating artwork in this way. But this is by far, I think, in my mind, a relevance play. And I think it's doing that in a couple of ways. I mean, one is sort of what John mentioned, where you're able to do creative things with art that you couldn't have even done before, which I think is really making it attention-grabbing. It's unexpected, right? And maybe that means it sticks in your memory so that next time you're considering how to entertain yourself, the Harvard Art Museums is top of mind. I think the other part of this in terms of the value it adds and how it makes it feel relevant is, I think, what we've been circling around here in terms of making this come down to earth.
Yeah.
Now this isn't just an artwork that exists several centuries ago, that's stiff and unapproachable, but it's talking to me in an accent and I can ask it questions. And so it makes it approachable.
Yeah.
And then related to that idea is more broadly this idea of democratizing art. What if I have no education in art and now I'm able to interact with this piece of art at my level? And it's responding in a personalized way to the sorts of questions that I have. And then that becomes, a first entry point to consuming this and developing a vocabulary around it.
Right. And is that how you saw it sort of coming together, John?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I really liked that whole aspect of the welcoming in, and I we're in the nurturing business when it comes to the museum visitor. We want them to feel welcome when they come in. We want them to feel welcome enough that they come back. But I think we tend to think that we put ourselves in the visitor's shoes, and we look at the visitor journey and we look at the different pain points and those moments that give them pause. And this definitely is attention grabbing. Yeah, and it nails it on that. I mean, even the attention grabbing. Like I showed this on my phone to the curator, and she jumped. She couldn't believe that this could happen. I'm like, so I was thinking this will really get a reaction from audiences. But yeah, definitely in the interpretive layer, the fact that they can interact and go deeper. Yeah. And all of a sudden feel a connection, and that's the thing, isn't it? Everybody talks about like you should want to inspire and catalyze those connections with art, Yeah. And welcome those multiple perspectives.
So how did it play out? What happened in the end? Oh,
yeah, it was good. There was some people internally. There were some reservations. But they appreciated the fact that there was, the intent behind it. Mm-hmm. They didn't want it to become a mascot. They didn't want to hear about like metrics or, clicks and all that kind of thing. Because they were wondering where were they coming from and what was the objective. And,
sure.
They just wanted. They were very, wary about the. Just how we're using the artwork, and we have to be sensitive in the choice of artworks because, attached to various artworks in the museums are donor expectations, yes. Cultural sensitivities and stuff like that. So we are kind of we have to be mindful when you do that, and some people can project their own feelings onto that too, external to the museum. And when we put it out to our subscriber base, we got big engagement, and there was some positive feedback. There was some negative. The negative feedback generally fell with the perception of AI out there.
Of course,
So I think that was the problem. But people did appreciate what we were trying to do. Mm-hmm. And we're blown away by the technology itself, and And there were some people that found it funny, good old-fashioned humor,
If people want to see this, if our listeners wanted to see it, is it able to be viewed on the website? Or
I think
we've been discussing the idea of doing just this. So, the way they ran the campaign was, of course, in a very controlled way, where some people see one version and others see another. But I think it stimulated some appetite, perhaps, for, round 2 in terms of doing something with Instagram or so. I guess it's to be determined.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it could suddenly drop
Yeah.
as they say, so yeah,
Very dramatic.
But I think there was I think there was a positive response as to how we handled the whole thing, and I have to say, Julian was great. We had a lot of conversation about this. And
Yeah, and related to this, John and team were kind enough to share the data from the campaign.
Okay.
And so we've been analyzing those, and we'll eventually, post the publication with the link there. So,
Awesome.
I guess listeners can stay tuned for that as well. That should provide some samples.
Yeah. We're coming close to the end of our time. I knew this would be a fun conversation, and it certainly played out that way. Julian, with all the things that John's describing about the delicate way that he had to approach this internally with his internal constituents, I'm wondering what the broader lesson is there for people. Again, we're all trying to figure out how to embrace AI on a number of different levels. How should we think about dealing with those conversations and the inevitable, pushback and tension that it creates?
I think one lesson is definitely that this discussion has to be newly had for your particular brand, because you're dealing with particular audiences, particular kind of products, and as we see here, maybe AI and an instantiation that's going to evoke new issues compared to other ones.
Mm-hmm.
I think one sort of lasting issue that I find intriguing about this case is, firstly, you emerge from the case clearly having learned that even though AI is a tool, when it comes to consumer perception, it's anything but, and you have to be really mindful about that. But one discussion point that students still hang around and ask me about is whether they think all of this is going to go away in a couple of years, okay? Because it's going to become ubiquitous, it's going to become familiar.
Yeah.
And what I find at least an intriguing possibility is that, yes, for some domains that might indeed happen, but there might continue to be other domains such as arts or places where we think the human touch is important, where we continue to want to insist that humans be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has implications for how brands strategize in terms of their positioning, but also for various other stakeholders. For example, if you think that in a world that's crowded with AI, we're not going to have enough human touch, but you think that this should be a right, then maybe you want to put policies in place to guarantee that.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone knows for sure. And this is something that's never fully resolved, but I like it that way.
Yeah. Just like an HBS case. Right? That's awesome. Julian, John, thank you for joining me on Cold Call.
Thank you so much.